Tyrance, I would say let's get started, and some people may join in a couple of minutes, and indeed, people are joining. So let me first of all share again the link to the Mentimeter, and this is where you can actually post questions for Tyrance. And then, as I was reminding to Carla, well, Carla, you're now the only one with the camera, so everybody else probably knows that the session is recorded, and stay with your camera off if you don't want you to be recorded on video or that your name is seen. Without any further ado, Tyrance, it's a pleasure to have you here. And you will be talking to us about using storytelling to empower underestimated communities. Tyrance, it's hard to find one way to describe you, as I was sharing with you before, because you are passionate by politics, but then at the moment you are focusing on your entrepreneurial effort. You have been, as part of that, working on building communities. You are an ecosystem builder. So curious to hear more about how these different roles are playing in the work that you're doing. The name of the company you founded is Black Tech Street, and the initiative that you're leading is also will bring us into learn for those of us who are not familiar about, unfortunately, a tragic moment in American history. Without any further ado, Tyrance, the stage is yours. We have about 20 minutes for your speech, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And if at any time it's difficult to hear me, please let me know and I'll speak up. So as I was introduced, Tyrance Billingsley, founder and executive director of Black Tech Street. And I'm here to talk to y'all about, how using the power of storytelling can empower underestimated communities. So before we get into anything about me or what our work is, I feel like I need to speak to you all about the story that informed and shaped my life and shapes my work. First and foremost, I believe the most powerful thing human beings ever created was stories. Everything in life is either built or organized around a story, whether it be governments, religions, movements, all of it. It begins with a story either about a person or about an issue. And that narrative can be used to transform the entire world, whether it be a Jewish rabbi, in ancient Israel, who said he was the son of God, or whether it be a prince who decided to resign himself from the pleasures of life to seek enlightenment. These stories can end up transforming not only entire societies, but how people view themselves. So let me take you through the story that has impacted me and that I grew up with. So in 1899, a man named O.W. Gurley resigned from President Grover Cleveland's administration to purchase 40 acres of land in Oklahoma, a state in the United States. O.W. Gurley was a Black man, and he was only a generation or so removed from slavery. And he purchased 40 acres of land for a purpose, because at the time, Oklahoma, which is the state that I'm from, it was actually intended to be an all-Black state. You had people flocking to Oklahoma to buy land so that they could actually end up building all-Black townships. And O.W. Gurley came there, in search of, all the rage based off of the oil boom to do something similar. So his name was Ottawa Gurley, but he called himself O.W. Gurley because at that time period, it was very common for white people to speak a Black person's first name rather than their surname as a sign of disrespect. So in an act of narrational jujitsu, he changed the story by saying, I'm going to nickname myself O.W. Gurley so that whatever name you try to call me by, it's going to be a name that I chose. But this wasn't going to be the only act of narrational jujitsu that this man initiated. With these 40 acres of land that he bought, he decided he was only going to sell the land to other Black people because he wanted to tell a new story of what it meant to be Black in America, what was possible. So he bought these 40 acres of land and he put out ads, across the country to let Black people know that you can come here to build something new. The story of Black people in America up until this point had been slavery, it had been racial terror, and he wanted to define a new possibility. So after he bought these 40 acres of land and he sent out these ads, Black people from all over the country began to flock to these 40 acres of land. And pretty soon they became businesses, streets, corridors. An entire town began to pop up out of this little experiment that he did, out of this new story that he was telling. And the largest group of Black people came from a town in another state called Greenwood, Mississippi. So that's actually where the name, the legendary Black Wall Street, which we're going to get into, the community ended up being called Greenwood because most of the Black people flocked from there. And after most of the Black people came here and a lot of these different people were working together, they ended up popping up businesses. And at the height of it, there were 600 Black businesses in Greenwood, 32 grocery stores, 21 churches, 6 privately owned planes, and automobiles were actually common, which, is something we take for granted today, but back then that was a sign of staggering wealth. So you had these Black people who, based on a story, just a story, who were less than a generation removed from slavery. Some of them were slaves and their parents were slaves. And these people came and created a community of immense wealth, unlike anything that had been seen before by Black people in America. My apologies. This is a picture of O.W. Gurley and some of his people, who are some of the original people who flocked to Greenwood. Next to him, you see John the Baptist Stratford, which is one of his core partners. And this is an image from Greenwood. Again, you have a car. Again, we take that for granted, but the wealth that was there was staggering. And it was so staggering that the great educator, Booker T. Washington, coined the term. He called it the Negro Wall Street because there was so much wealth and business prosperity there. And life was good at the height of Greenwood. It was actually incredible. So the question becomes, how do you go from images like this to images like this? The short answer is racism, but let me invite you a little deeper into the story. So in 1921, there was a young man, a 19-year-old Black man named Diamond Dick Rowland. His name was Diamond Dick Rowland. It was a nickname because he loved money. He had actually dropped out of school so he could hold down multiple jobs to get as much money as possible. And he was a shoe shiner in a shoe shine parlor in downtown Tulsa. Now, in 1921, everything was segregated. Bathrooms, stores, everything, water fountains, everything was segregated. And it was segregated to the point that a lot of places downtown didn't even have bathrooms for colored people to use. And this was true for the shoe shine parlor that he worked in. So to use the bathroom, he had to walk a block or so over to the Drexel building and get on an elevator to go to the top floor because that was the only colored bathroom in all of downtown. So one day he has to use the restroom and he does this. He walks, a block over. He goes into the Drexel building and he gets in an elevator. Now in 1921, elevators had operators. They weren't, self-worked like they are today. You had somebody who you had to tell, will you press this button? And then they'll take you to the floor you want to go to. And at that time, the operator of this elevator was a white woman named Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white girl, actually. Both of these are really kids. So Dick Rowland, the story goes, what happens next is history has been hard pressed to really pinpoint it, but what's generally accepted is Dick Rowland was in a rush to handle his business and get back to work. So he runs, he's running, trying to, try to make time, save time so he can get back. And as he's coming to the elevator, he trips over the threshold. And on his way down, he's falling. He tries to stabilize himself, and he accidentally grabs Sarah Page's arm as he's falling. This results in Sarah Page screaming, and the clerk at the front desk of the Drexel building hears this scream. Now, at this time, there is a very strong stereotype that Black men have this insatiable lust for white women and want to rape them. So when he grabbed Sarah Page and she screamed, he immediately knew what conclusion was likely going to be drawn from this situation. So he runs, and he gets out of there and he runs home. Unfortunately, his suspicions are ended up proven, because the clerk ends up reporting what happened, and the next day Dick Rowland is arrested. And the Tulsa Tribune, which is the paper that the main paper of Tulsa at the time, ends up publishing an article that essentially says, it's an ad, and it essentially says "nab a Negro," because it's accusing him of trying to rape Sarah Page exactly as he knew what would happen. But this ad was more than just saying that he raped Sarah Page. It was actually an ad. It said "nab a Negro" because they wanted to subject him to something that was unfortunately very heinous and very common at the time, which was called lynching. And for those of you who don't know, lynching was a practice where a Black person would be unlawfully abducted. They would be beaten, set on fire, and hanged. And both of these things would happen typically while they were still alive. And after the body had been charred, it was actually not uncommon that some of them would take souvenirs from this event. It was an extremely heinous act. And that's important. It's important to go into detail about that, because this is the story of Black people in America prior to what happened, prior to what was built at Black Wall Street. That was the story, where a white person could just with impunity take a Black person and kill them without trial or without anything. And that's exactly what was about to happen to Dick Rowland. So when it gets out that he had supposedly done this, a white mob forms outside of the jailhouse, and they want to go arrest Dick. They want to get Dick Rowland out of his jail cell so they can lynch him. Now, this is in the aftermath of World War I. So a lot of the Black men of this community are armed veterans, and they're not going to allow this story of what it used to mean to be Black in America to bleed over into the new story that they built with Black Wall Street. So they go meet the white mob, and they defend Dick Rowland, and they give him time to get out of the jail. And after he's gone, the crowds disperse a little bit, but everybody kind of stays around. And then a white person goes up to one of these Black veterans and once again tries to tell a different story. He says, "What are you going to do with that gun, Negro? Give me that gun." And he tries to take the gun from the Black person. The Black person defends the story that he has built, the story of autonomy, and this new story of what it means to be Black in America, and he doesn't give up the gun. They struggle over the gun, a shot flies out, and all hell breaks loose. The aftermath of that shot is the images you see. Over the course of 2 days, white mobs pour into Greenwood, burning, looting, and killing as many Black people as they can see. The National Guard is actually called in to help keep peace, but rather than keep peace, the National Guard actually helps firebomb the community from the air. And some of these pictures that you see that are so destructive, it's because of that. This is actually the first instance in history where the United States actually dropped bombs on its own citizens. And a lot of people don't know that. So over the course of those 2 days, 10,000 homes are destroyed. 10,000 Black people are left homeless, and over 300 are murdered. But the newspaper only says it was 36. And it doesn't call it a massacre, it calls it a riot. Because if it's a riot, insurance companies don't have to pay out because you're responsible for destroying some of your own property. In a course of 2 nights, the most incredible community, Black community in the history of the country was wiped out. This story that they had told supposedly looked like it was snuffed out. This is the story that I grew up with, and this is what informed my work. So 100 years later, I'm a born and raised Tulsan. I'm a relative of survivors, and I begin to ask myself the question, what could Black Wall Street have been had it been supported and not destroyed? And looking at the level of tenacity that it took for these Black entrepreneurs to build these incredible businesses during Jim Crow, it reminded me a lot of the tech industry. And when I coupled that with the fact that tech is one of the only industries in which you can build intergenerational wealth in 7 to 10 years via successful company exits, it's the core medium through which all global innovation is taking place and new markets for wealth creation are popping up every single year. And that by the year 2030, there will be 4.3 million vacant tech jobs due to a tech talent shortage. I not only saw an incredible wealth building opportunity for African Americans, I saw the Black Wall Street vision kind of drawn to a new conclusion. So this led me to surmise that had Black Wall Street been supported and not destroyed, it will be nothing other than a premier Black tech hub or Black tech innovation economy. And that's where the name Black Tech Street came from. Our mission is to rebirth Black Wall Street as a premier Black tech economy, but also catalyze a national movement that sees Black people embrace tech and STEM to build wealth and impact the world. So our approach is that in the day-to-day, we serve as a liaison between the Tulsa community and different Black tech and Black STEM opportunities. And our approach is rooted in 6 strategic pillars: entrepreneur support, narrative and communications, capital, workforce, infrastructure, and policy. And our goal is to, between these 6 pillars, using them as a framework to facilitate investment within our community and to tell a new story that says to the young Black child in Tulsa that I am what a big time tech CEO could look like. I am what the technologist who could help solve climate change could look like. And it is my birthright to enter the tech industry because my people have always been an innovative people. Our specific approach has those 2 elements. It is storytelling and it is program development. From a programmatic perspective, we have launched an initiative called In 2031, which is where we are convening economic stakeholders from across the city within those 6 pillars to create a 10-year ecosystem innovation strategy for building a Black tech ecosystem. We've actually got the partnership of the Tulsa Authority for Economic Opportunity on this. So it'll actually be a genuine city-sanctioned strategy that is developed alongside the community that will help us get to a point where we've built a community of Black people who have a viable pathway to wealth creation through the tech industry. This is so important to me because outside of the programming, as I said before, stories are the most important thing that we have. So I want to tell a new story to Black people, both locally in Tulsa and in the United States, that tells them that the economic position of Black people that was bolstered by racism, that's been bolstered by so many different systems, including racism, that economic condition can be undone by telling a new story. And that new story is that the tech industry is the medium through which Black people can close the racial wealth gap and unleash our full innovative and creative capability. My storytelling takes many different forms, which is why I juxtapose these 2 pictures, these other pictures. You saw the other one of me in a suit, Black Tech Street. I've brokered deals with companies like HP, currently in talks with Microsoft. I've spoken to the CIO at Harvard. We brokered relationships with NASA to host hackathons. HP is spinning up the HP Teaching Fellows program in honor of Black Tech Street. I've done all of that, but I also do this. I also sometimes have a bullhorn, and I'm in the streets trying to tell people, not only when there's an injustice, Sometimes this is the form that it takes when I'm talking about the opportunities that, Black Tech Street can give. But I put this picture in there because this was during this was in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. This was in the summer, and these protests happened. This was also when I really, really, really decided I was going to do Black Tech Street. It had been a concept for a while, but it was this summer, and it was after this happened that I immediately kind of got that kick that said, I need to do this. I'd already been working on it, but this was that real catalyst. And the reason why that's important is because telling these stories, it's what can change these systems, whether it be telling the story of injustice that murdered a Black man, or telling the story of the injustice that destroyed a whole community, or telling the story of the new opportunity that an industry produces for an oppressed people. The world is built by stories, so it makes the most sense that stories are what can change them. And I believe that just as I'm doing this work for Black Tech Street, there are underserved and oppressed communities across our country and across this world that the only difference, the only thing that they really need to get to a different place, clearly they'll need resources, but the first thing that they need is a new story about who they are, where they come from, and where they're going. Even if their story didn't have a great beginning, I believe that what I'm doing with Black Tech Street can really be used as a model to say, it doesn't matter what a community is facing or what their issues are. If we can put a new story in people's hearts and minds, something incredible can be built, just like Black Wall Street. These people were one generation removed from slavery, and they built something unlike anything the country had ever seen. And I think that's possible to happen in communities across the world. Thank you.
This was perfectly on time, Tyrance, as well, right? Wow, thank you. Thank you for this beautiful sharing. So I invite everyone to post questions either into the Mentimeter, or as we are a relatively small group, feel free also to post questions here directly into the chat. Maybe I can start, Tyrance. You have highlighted the power of stories, and I think what came through your presentation is also the power of a strong sense of meaning and purpose. This seems to be what has been driving you in your efforts. What I would be curious about is to hear a bit more about how you have engaged other people and communicating your passion or your sense of purpose to initiate your company and to start building this community.
Absolutely. So I engaged people when I first started talking about this. I was 24 years old at the time. I'm 26 now, and I really started talking about this locally with different people. It was right. The centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre was actually just last year. So in the years leading up to it, I really started talking about this, and it really resonated with a lot of people. And I was essentially building consensus before I ever started the organization and got funding. I was really building consensus among the Black community here and some of the white community in Tulsa so that they could understand what an incredible opportunity we had to change the narrative. This ended up continuing to spiral, well, kind of really snowball. I started with conversations with people from my community, and then before I knew it, I was having conversations with heads of companies and eventually the CEO of Second Muse, Todd Coizane, and he ended up loving the vision so much that he ended up letting Second Muse power Black Tech Street. So, and now 3 of their employees kind of work remotely with the Black Tech Street team. We're hiring people on the ground. But part of why I was able to be so successful with this story is because I live it and I breathe it. I'm born in Tulsa. I'm a relative of survivors, and I timed it correctly. I knew that the world was on a precipice of changing how I viewed race not only after George Floyd, but also because of the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I was able to, I felt that alignment, you know, with the purpose my ancestors had. And I decided to really just engage by, you know, using that energy to touch people's hearts. And that's how it started. Since then, you know, to date, we've raised $500,000. We've got 1.5 million pending, and we've got some pretty incredible partnerships as of right now.
Thank you, Tyrance. Lisa, I'll take your question in a moment, but I think Joachim's question still remains in this area of storytelling. And Joachim is asking if you can share a concrete example or story that had a strong impact on the community.
Absolutely. So this story in particular, I wrote an article on this vision in January of 2020. And since I wrote that vision, collectively as a city, $40 million have been invested in the Black tech scene, and 4 different organizations with similar missions to Black Tech Street have popped up in Tulsa as a result. So when it comes to what kind of impact it's had on the community on a macro scale, it had a very big impact. You know, some of the stuff that existed, some of the people, you know, some of it was started by big philanthropy, and I didn't feel some of it started the way it needed to, but all in all, just telling that story the first time ended up being a catalyst for the entire community. And now Black tech is on everybody's mind. Yes, a lot of people are thinking Black Tech Street, but even those who aren't directly thinking Black Tech Street, Black tech is all over the Tulsa scene right now, and it's kind of a huge focus. So I'd say that's the best example I can give.
Thank you, Tyrance. So let me take Lisa's question. Lisa is asking, we are at this conference, TEAL, New Ways of Working, and we indeed want to have the wholeness component. And I guess part of wholeness component is different cultures, different people of different races talking to each other and tapping into each other's creativity and resources. So Lisa's question is, how can we actually, even unconsciously, avoid that we recreate the old patriarchal structures that created a divide in the first place? And perhaps you can share something from your current experience of community building.
So yes, and I'm glad you asked that question, because when I set out to build Black Tech Street, one of the first things I said was, we're not just trying to create a Black version of Silicon Valley. That is not what we want. We do not, there are a lot of times when these movements happen, some of the Black people who are behind these movements, a lot of them have mindsets that kind of say, we just want to replace white people atop this oppressive hierarchy. And that's not okay. We need to dismantle this hierarchy to ensure that there's not suffering regardless. You know, we don't want that hierarchy. We want to rethink how things are being done at the core. How do we do that in a successful way? You know, I mean, man, if I had the answer to that question immediately, I don't know that any of us would be here. But I think that thinking about it first and foremost is key, because when you have to understand, when you grow up in a culture, that culture becomes your default pattern. And most of the Western world has been built on the patriarchy and a lot of oppressive systems. So I think movements like this are so important, because when it comes to rethinking work is designed after those exact same systems. So I think a great place to start would actually be in the corporations and the nonprofits, rethinking how the workplace is structured. And I think that could be a good catalyst for people maybe actually thinking differently about how they approach their broader lives. But no, I'll let you know when I get the answer to that question. You know, hopefully we can find it.
So we have Catherine building upon Lisa's question and asking, can your movement reshape venture capital and influence it towards creating startups that are more progressive organizations?
So I've had this question before. In our powering partner, Second Muse, they actually have it's something called Future Economy Lab. And what they're actually doing is trying to rethink the very capital mechanisms that we use to fund entrepreneurs, because there are a lot of people, and there's been a lot of research that actually says the VC system is kind of inherently racist and biased towards women and men of color, people of color. So I mean, that thesis is something that, as I've watched venture capital and look at the mechanisms, I'm starting to see it more and more. I'm not saying VC is irredeemable by any means, but when it comes to how we fund entrepreneurs and what the kind of capital we provide them and the kind of support we provide them, I think there's value in actually rethinking the very systems that we use, and rather than just thinking about how VC can do it better. But I definitely think I know of VCs that are trying to move in a sense that is empowering and investing in underestimated entrepreneurs and ensuring that the companies they invest in are going to have a positive and progressive impact on the world. But even within that, some of the mechanics of that culture, it ends up bringing some of the toxic traits we don't always want to be present. But I don't think VCs are redeemable, and I think these are conversations that we could have that I think could change the system, but it'll take changing the culture first.
Romina, there is your question, and I would ask you to ask the question directly to Tyrance, as you probably can express it the way you really were meaning it.
Thanks. Yeah, Tyrance. Wow. Thank you for your sharing of the Tulsa race massacre. I admit I wasn't aware of this, and I'm in Canada, not in the US, but we also have dynamics and tensions in Canada. And I'm in HR, and so I work in a church, actually, and we've been talking about what matters in hiring and what matters in equity for the past long while, but specifically more recently. And from talking to my colleagues from different races around the world, the point that they wanted to keep getting across is that representation matters. And while I'm in a white church, I would say it's a Scottish background church, I've just hired a Black worship pastor, female, and together we're walking down this path of like, how do we navigate some of these conversations that are awkward for these white Scottish settler background people, because we don't want to offend and we want to recognize the narrative, like the actual narrative. And where integration is part of the culture in Canada and partnership is always the goal, we have to start somewhere. And so like what they've been saying is that you just have to start somewhere, and you have to make sure that you're representing all cultures and all races well. So I was just kind of, my question was coming from a place of when you set up a Black business, it's not that you're setting it up anti-white, right? Like it's the goal is always integration and partnership, and it's about providing opportunities, because without setting up those Black businesses or Black opportunities, they're not yet there enough. They're not palpably present. And so we have to create the opportunities. And so young Black entrepreneurs are creating these opportunities, and it's up to then the white businesses to say, come on over, work with us. Like, we want to integrate, we want to partner. It's not about Black versus white or white versus Black. Am I?
Oh no, you're absolutely correct. I think that when it was your question finished, or?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So no, you're absolutely correct. And I think that when it comes to issues like this, when you have a people or any group that has, you know, historically been oppressed, and there have been specific barriers placed on them. Sometimes you have to hyper focus a bit of attention to unshackling those barriers and getting them to a point of equity. But once that point of equity is reached, and even in that process, you know, you in no way, shape, or form should be alienating anybody. You know, I believe human beings are here for two reasons. We're here to love people and be creative, and you can't do either of those things. When you try to do, when you try to put oppressive systems, or you try to keep anybody out of collaboration, you're really limiting your capacity for both of those things.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're doing is great. And I also think that some people don't always understand why there should be that innate focus there, but helping them understand is key to the importance of the movement.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, we're not ready. We can't embrace well. And then the people that are on staff who are Filipino or whatever, like, no, get them in the door. We will keep working on this together. So
that's the attitude it takes.
Thank you, Romina, for the question. Tyrance, we have one question which is basically asking you to share your opinion about the corporate world and the fact that there have been, I mean, it would be probably hard to find a company which is not doing some kind of inclusiveness initiative, diversity and inclusion. And yet the question, well, highlights that many of these initiatives eventually are not as successful as they would wish to be. What is your opinion on this? Why it is not the case that we are more successful there? So
this is a really thank you. Who asked this question? Can you raise your hand? Can I see you?
Joachim. Yeah.
Thank you so much, because this is something I was actually speaking to just yesterday. This is an issue because many corporations see inclusivity as charity, and that's not really how you need to see it. That's not at all how you need to see it. Now we have, and this is what I think my solution is. Companies have shown they will spend any amount of money, and they will completely reinvent themselves in pursuit of two things: to be on the forefront of innovation and to get the very best talent. Companies will do absolutely anything. So what they need to do is stop seeing hiring and inclusivity as a charity issue and start seeing it as the greatest, most untapped resource of talent and innovation that they could possibly get. And here's the analogy that I used. In the early 2000s, when Google was a startup, everybody thought they were crazy because they had cultivated this environment where, you know, they allowed for their workers to be creative. They had, you know, ping pong tables, they had chefs there. They really rethought what it meant to be in corporate America and what corporate life and work life could look like. Now, Google has some issues today, but that's not the point. The point is that they were on the forefront of innovation back then. And what I think needs to happen is, just like there was a movement that rethought what corporate life was like, there needs to be one. Can you imagine if one of the major companies, of Google or Amazon, they convened the best DEI and inclusion experts? They let them get under the hood, and they said, I want you to redesign our workplace and our culture to ensure that it attracts the most inclusive people and the most creative people. And can you imagine if one company did that, and then there was an almost competition, almost arms race between all the big companies to say, no, we also want inclusive talent. We want them to be able to thrive and be retained. And you have this situation where they're all racing to get the best DEI experts to cultivate the best inclusion and work environment. That's the kind of thing that we need. We need something that will incentivize these companies to move on this like it's the next big opportunity, rather than just charity. Because nobody, as much as we hate to say it, as much as we like to, you know, talk about how we want to help, nobody likes truly giving up power just for the sake of giving up power. Nobody will admit that, but it's absolutely true. So framing this in the context of the next big innovation and talent opportunity, I think that's the way to make companies take this seriously. Because as much as I hate to say it, I don't think it'll ever be taken seriously as long as we're trying to push it from the goodness of their heart type place. And I don't mean to be cynical, that's just the truth.
Tyrance, I have the word mindset in mind at the moment. It's also mindset thing to be successful in this area. Linking this back to the narrative and the importance of creating a compelling narrative. Can you share your insights into how a narrative can help a person or a community, a group, to shift their mindset?
Absolutely. So this has been something that's near and dear to my heart for a while, because ever since I was a young age, my parents, they always went out of the way to tell me that as a young Black male, I came from kings and queens, whether it be from Ghana or, Liberia, some of those other kings and queens. And they said that regardless, and, some of it's mythology, but they said that to combat the narrative that they knew I would face as a Black man in America, that, our history is slavery, you've been oppressed, you might be less than and less than capable. They use that to combat that narrative, and those stories are why I feel I've been successful, to be honest. I mean, my parents did not have a ton of money. There were not any connections that they could give me to get me to the place that I am today. But all they did, they told me a narrative. They told me a story that said you are worth something and you can achieve anything. It is what you come from and it is what you can do. So that has allowed that power to me. And that is also some of the framework that made me say, I know a narrative can transform an entire community, because it did that for me. I know what can be done. And then knowing the history of Black Wall Street, it was like, absolutely. So how do you do that? It really starts with self-perception. That's the biggest thing. How do you look at yourself? Do you see someone of value? Do you see someone who is capable? Do you see someone who grows? Are you nailed down to a specific image of yourself, or are you able to grow and evolve and adapt? Those are the key elements that you have to use in a narrative to get somebody to change how they see themselves. And once they change how they see themselves, that'll transform how they see the world. So with us, this takes the form of storytelling about technology and about how Black people have always been innovative, trying to demystify STEM and things for young Black children, really getting them early so that they can fully understand that this is something that not only can be done, but should be done by somebody who looks like you.
Thank you, Tyrance. Would you like to share with us a little bit more about the different activities that you are involved into? How are you shaping this community? What is your company at the moment really focusing upon, so that we can a bit better understand what are the different areas that you're covering?
Absolutely. So the key and most important thing we're doing right now, I mentioned in the speech, it's the N2031. We're working to build this 10-year Black tech innovation strategy for the city, so that not only the city, but the different ecosystem entities who are trying to work to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem will have a plan that is sourced by the community to help them understand what are the points of impact that they can affect to help get to our ultimate goal, which is an ecosystem where technology is used by Black people to really improve their quality of life, whether it be in businesses or institutions. That's key, because one of the biggest reasons things like this fail, even when they're done by people from the community, is because they just project what they want to do, what they think needs to happen, rather than speaking with the actual community. What you do for me, without me, you do to me. That's a phrase that we have. So N2031 is a key deal. One of the other things that we've done in the workforce and education pillar is we have a partnership with Hewlett Packard. They're giving the HP Teaching Fellows to Tulsa. So every year, HP has 25 spots for teachers from across North America, and they get put in this network of incredible, like, other teachers, so they can share thought leadership and best practice, and they get access to the latest technology that helps them teach STEM and ensure that their kids are ready to mobilize into a digitalized world. They've got 25 spots. They had 7,000 applicants last year alone. In partnership with Black Tech Street, they're giving all of those spots to Black Tulsa teachers this year, so that they can use those resources to help teach their Black children and ensure that they're mobilizing into a digitalized economy. One of the other things that we did before that was we actually got Tulsa to participate in the NASA Space Apps Global Hackathon, where NASA made data available, and we had we hosted where some of the other local Tulsans could use some of this data to solve problems. And we ended up getting the chief of staff from the NASA Johnson Space Center, Black woman, Monica Lee Foley, to come and speak about her experience, how they're currently working to put people on Mars, and the experience of young Black people in STEM. And then the last thing we're brokering that I can't even really talk about just yet, but we've got Microsoft is engaging very seriously about a digital transformation play in Tulsa due to our narrative right now. So those are some of the things that we're in right now in some of the activities that we're really pushing.
Thank you, Tyrance. And I think we can take now the question from Catherine, who was asking about the impact that you're starting having on the youth community in Tulsa.
Yes, so I've actually spoken to children recently on a lot of different occasions. I've been speaking to schools, telling them about this narrative and telling them about what they can do in the tech industry and what the opportunity it has. But we actually plan to have a much more robust operation to go into these schools and talk to these kids about what opportunities are available and in front of them. So the impact that we're having so far, I've been told multiple times that the story has inspired some of the Black kids to be less afraid of STEM, but it hasn't quite reached that mass penetration that we want just yet. But we hope to get that sometime this year. Catherine, I saw your hand was raised.
Yeah, if I may, it's really a pleasure to be here and so exciting about the work that you're doing. I'm here in the San Francisco area. I'm curious, as you create an ecosystem and really building up the muscle of STEM with the young people, where there's so much hope, and this is where it's really needed. I'm curious in the school systems if you kind of what's happening in the high schools with robotics and other hands-on things, in the high schools. It's something I believe in to help people, and I am disappointed in my area that the tech community is not actively working in these high school programs to really influence in so many different ways. And so it's kind of my thing, but I'm just curious from your perspective, really working how you're working to bring that STEM hands-on into high schools and even middle schools and lower.
So
thank you.
So again, part of what I can't talk about with what I mentioned that's a big part of the package we're brokering right now, because I believe that, K through 12 STEM education is crucial. Those are the key years. Top tier K through 12 STEM education can really drive up the numbers of people and the diversity of people we see in STEM programs. And that's why I'm kind of excited about this deal we're brokering, because for a corporation to be interested in doing that, it shows they're truly invested in seeing this industry grow and seeing it grow and flourish in terms of the many different kinds of people who are in it. So I think that's key. We had thought about how to do that in a lot of different ways and didn't know if it was specifically our lane. We knew it was our lane to try to get those opportunities, but directly providing them wasn't necessarily something that we would do outside of the story. But we tend to lean on our partners to make that happen. And I think we've got a partner that can be really transformative on that front.
Tyrance, I would be curious to hear a bit more about you as an entrepreneur. When we met briefly yesterday, you shared something about trying something out before coming to what you're doing now and failing, and you are testing different things and experimenting a lot. And perhaps there is something you could share about what you're learning for yourself in this journey, and maybe where also this is leading you, or how the trajectory has been informed by your experimentation.
Absolutely. So I was telling Ricardo yesterday about my background a little bit. So I've always had two core passions, politics and entrepreneurship. And that's because I feel that they're the two things that have the biggest, potential to impact the world. And the initial question I had was, which am I going to do first, politics or entrepreneurship? I went the politics route first. So in college, president of student government, rose to be president of student government for the state of Oklahoma, chaired the advisory board for the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, interned for our mayor, helping with education and economic and civic policy. Then I apprenticed under State Senator Kevin Matthews and State Representative Regina Goodwin, who represent my district, both Black representatives. Then I had to kind of really take a step back and think. And I said, yes, I do think politics is my place, but the innovations that really change the world, they're not going to come from policy. That impact is not going to come from government. That's going to come from entrepreneurs and people thinking innovatively and changing things. So I said, if I was to die tomorrow, which one would I be okay saying, okay, I might have wanted to do that, but I wasn't able to do it? Entrepreneurship was the one I felt that I really needed to do first. So I tried to combine my passions of government and entrepreneurship by founding a civic tech startup called City Fora. It was meant to be a one-stop shop for administering city services. And I was 20 when I founded the company. A lot I didn't know, a lot of different factors, including 2 other companies raising pretty large rounds doing similar things. Ultimately, that led me to fail at that business. And it was great experience because it really broke me into the startup world. Everything that I had before then was book knowledge, but that broke me into the startup world. It got me an entrepreneurial fellowship, so I got to learn even more and have more hands-on knowledge. It got me through 2 different accelerators, so I got to get firsthand experience through that. But more importantly, it kind of showed me the importance of being able to try an idea, and even if it doesn't work, either pivot it or get to the next thing. And I think that that's absolutely invaluable because that's key to an entrepreneur. In terms of where I am today and where I see Black Tech Street going, I really see this being something that can catalyze a movement that changes the economic position of Black people in America, potentially worldwide, but for sure in America. And I think the reason it can do that is not only because the opportunity it's setting up, but because the story that's powering it. Black Wall Street is the original 4-minute mile for Black people in America. It was the original limit breaker to show what was possible in a country where we were literally treated as subhuman. And I feel that's the perfect narrative to close the massive wealth gap between Black and white people. I don't know if you all know this, but in America, the net worth of Black people is set to hit 0 by the year 2053. Black wealth is set to be 0. So the gap is increasing. So there's not only an incredible opportunity here, there's a real calamity that we need to stave off. And the incredible scalability of the tech industry, the low barriers to entry to learning some of these skills, and the incredible, the high earning potential make it kind of a perfect medium to remedy this issue. And that's ultimately where I see all of this going.
Thank you, Tyrance. We are heading towards the end of our time together. I would be curious to hear a bit more about community building. And this is a hot topic also in many companies. How do you create successful communities? What are the key ingredients? What works and what doesn't? So what has been your experience so far to create a thriving community, and what advice would you give any given corporation to do something like that within a company?
So this is interesting. So far, the experience that I have in terms of building a thriving community came from, because before all of this that I just described to you, and well, in tandem with it, I'm a community leader. We do a lot of community organizing, campaigns and things like that. The phrase that I used before, what you do for me without me, you do to me, is a phrase that my community lives by. So when it comes to trying to do anything for a community, it's important to do it with that community and not to try to build or think about what you think the community needs and then put it on them. It's important that the community feels like they are partners and that they are building whatever you're building alongside you. I think that same energy can be applied to the workplace and to corporations. When you're trying to build this culture, you're trying to build this community where everybody's caring about each other and caring about the mission. It's important that they don't feel like it's top down. They don't feel like, you're up on Mount Olympus and you come down occasionally to, talk about what should or should not be happening. When it comes to building this thriving community, it's important that I think you kind of dwell among the people. Of course, there are always going to have to be dynamics that continue and stay respected, but it's important that you kind of dwell among the people, in that you're with them in the sense of when you're trying to create new things or trying to direct new policies, that it's done alongside them, so they feel like they're partnering with you to build what you're trying to build rather than you're commanding them. But that's the advice I could give.
Very nice, Tyrance. Before I forget, I'll share with you the link to the spatial chat, where we will be meeting at 7:30 Central European Time, for those of us who want to continue the conversation with you. And with that, Tyrance, perhaps there are some final words that you would like to share with the audience, also based on the questions that you have got.
Y'all have been really engaging. I really appreciate this. This story is really important to me, and I think to the country. And I really think that, this work is so important. It can be really impactful. So I'm really glad y'all listened to me today, and I'm glad to have really been able to speak in this conversation setting with you.
Tyrance, thank you so much. I think this session with you has been inspiring for all of us. It also brought us to a topic and to learn a little bit about the history of the US, and to bring us to be more sensitive to this topic. So thank you very much for having been with us.